The dying do not ask for soup. This is something Yusuf Ademi learned the hard way, in the way he learned most things, by ignoring what he was told and paying attention instead to what he saw. What he saw, on the morning that changed everything, was an alien woman sitting alone at a table in the corner of the station commissary, with a full tray of food in front of her that she had not touched in 40 minutes. Yusuf was the commissary cook on Waypoint 11, a mid-route resupply station orbiting a gas giant that most species used as a rest stop and fuel depot on long hauls. He was 51 years old, originally from Lagos by way of Marseille, with hands that had been burned and cut and healed so many times they looked like a map of somewhere difficult to reach. He had been cooking since he was 9 years old. He had been cooking in space for 12 years. He was not a doctor, he was not a diplomat. He was the man who made the food. This is a story about what that means. Waypoint 11 was not a beautiful station. Nobody had designed it to be. It was functional in the way a truck stop is functional. It had everything you needed and nothing you didn't, and the aesthetic ran to exposed conduit and floor drains and the kind of lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. Yusuf had been here for 3 years. He had taken the posting because it was quiet, and because quiet was what he had needed after the last several years of his life, which had not been quiet in the ways that mattered. His wife had died. Not suddenly, there had been 18 months between the diagnosis and the end, and those months had had a texture that Yusuf still couldn't find words for in any language he spoke, and he spoke for. After he had needed to be somewhere that needed him in a simple and daily way. He needed to be somewhere he could feed people. So Waypoint 11, 700 permanent crew and rotating staff of up to 3,000 transient visitors at any given time, 12 species regularly docking, 23 dietary profiles he had learned to accommodate, one commissary running 18 hours a day with 3 rotating crews of 4 and Yusuf as head cook on the morning shift. It was not glamorous, he did not need it to be. The station had its rhythms. Yusuf knew them the way he knew his kitchen, not as a list of facts but as a felt thing, the way a current feels against a hand in water. He knew which haulers came in tired and needed something heavy, and which diplomatic transports had passengers who ate like birds and needed things arranged beautifully on the plate, even if the portions were tiny. He knew the Grath crew that came through every 6 weeks would eat anything he put in front of them and be loudly grateful about it. He knew the Velun cargo collective ate only at very specific temperature gradients and had once sent back a perfectly good dish because it was 2 degrees warm. He knew the commissary in the morning, the light, the sounds, the smell, the particular quality of how the space felt before the first rush came through. Which is why he noticed her. She was sitting in the far corner table, the one by the viewport that looked out over the gas giant's swirling amber atmosphere. She was Senari, he knew the species from 3 years of cooking for their transit crews, tall and angular with a slight bioluminescence under the skin that pulsed faintly at the wrists and temples, like a slow heartbeat made visible. They were a proud people, formal, with a complex system of social protocol that he had learned just enough of to avoid the worst mistakes. The tray in front of her held standard Senari fare. He had prepared it himself that morning, the temperature-specific nutrient broth and the dense grain cakes they favored, with the particular mineral supplement shaker on the side. It was correct. It was complete. It had been sitting untouched for 40 minutes and the temperature on the broth was dropping, which meant it was heading outside the range she could metabolize it in. She was not eating. She was sitting very still, with her hands in her lap and her face pointed at the viewport, and the bioluminescence at her wrists was doing something Yusuf had not seen before, pulsing at an irregular rhythm, stuttering slightly like a light with a failing connection. He had seen grief do specific things to people. He recognized it the way you recognize a key fitting into a lock, not intellectually, but in the body, in the chest. He finished what he was doing, he was never careless with food in progress, and then he walked out from behind the counter. His assistant, a young Ganish woman named Presti, who was 23 and very competent and perpetually mystified by Yusuf, watched him cross the commissary floor. Yusuf, she said, in the careful tone she used when she thought he was about to do something she would have to apologize for later. The Senari don't like to be approached when liars. I know, he said. The social protocol for unaddressed Senari specifically states that. I've read it. Oh, then, I'll be careful, he said. He crossed the commissary. A few other early shift diners glanced up at him, a Grath engineer eating an enormous plate of protein, two human cargo workers who had the look of people halfway through a very long haul, a Velun researcher who was measuring the temperature of their meal with a personal sensor and looking satisfied about it. As he reached the corner table, the Senari woman did not look up. Up close, the bioluminescent irregularity was more pronounced. Her wrists, resting in her lap, pulsed in a broken rhythm, short, short, long, pause, short, short, long, that matched nothing in the normal Senari bioluminescent vocabulary he had learned. Her face, pointed at the gas giant outside the viewport, was still in a way that cost something. Yusuf stood for a moment. He thought about what Presti had said, and about the social protocol he had read, and about 18 months of watching someone try to carry something too heavy and not let anyone see. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were the pale silver that Senari eyes became when they were very young or very old or very depleted. He had not known eyes could look depleted before he met the Senari. "You are the food preparation specialist," she said. Her galactic standard was precise and formal in the way of someone who had learned it academically rather than by living in it. "Oh, Yusuf," he said, "yes. I have not requested assistance. As I know, the social protocols of my people dictate that an individual in Vethara is not to be approached unless they initiate." "I know," he said. "I've read them. I'm sorry for breaking the protocol. I'll go if you want me to." He paused. "But your broth is getting cold, and in about 4 minutes it'll be outside your metabolic range, and then you won't be able to eat it at all." Well, she looked at the tray, then back at him. "I am not hungry," she said. "I know," he said. "That's not what I asked." She blinked. The Senari blink was a slow thing, more like a shutter closing and opening than what a human eye does, and when she blinked the silver of her eyes seemed to reset slightly, like a screen refreshing. "You did not ask anything," she said. "No," he said, "I didn't." He stood up, he took the tray. She watched him. "I am going to heat the broth back up," he said. "And I am going to bring it back, and you do not have to eat it, but it will be the right temperature and it will be here." He walked back to the kitchen. Presti stared at him. "The Senari protocols for Vethara." "I know, Presti. You took her food. I'm heating it up. Yusuf." "She's alone," he said simply and went back to the stove. He brought the broth back, he set it down, he did not sit. He went back to the kitchen and he ran his morning service, which was the thing he was there to do. The Grath engineer wanted a second plate. The cargo workers needed something fast and dense to carry them through to their next sleep cycle. The Velun researcher sent back the temperature reading, and this time it was exactly right, and they made a small gesture that meant satisfied approval. He watched the corner table from the kitchen. She did not eat the broths, but she moved her hand to hold the bowl, and the warmth of it moved through her fingers, and the bioluminescence at her wrists shifted very slightly, not regular yet, but less broken, like something starting to remember its rhythm. He did not go back. At the end of his shift, when the morning rush had moved through and the commissary was in the quiet interval before midday, she was still there. The bowl was half empty. He made her something else. He thought about it for 10 minutes first, going through what he knew about Senari nutrition and what he knew about what people needed when they were carrying something too heavy. He made a decision he couldn't have fully explained, something small, something with texture, something that would require deliberate attention to eat, because sometimes the act of having to pay attention to the physical thing in front of you was the only rope back. He brought it out, set it down beside the empty bowl, did not sit. "What is this?" she said. "Grain cake, different preparation from what you had. A recipe I worked out 3 months ago for a Senari crew that came through. I wasn't happy with the standard temperature ratios, so I adjusted them." She looked at the cake, then at him. "You adjusted the ratios." "The standard recipe loses about 30% of the mineral absorption efficiency if you don't account for the interaction between the—" He stopped. "I'm explaining the kitchen. You don't need to know about the kitchen." "No," she said, "tell me." He told her. He stood beside the table and explained, in more detail than was probably necessary, the specific interaction between two Senari mineral compounds that caused a chain reaction when heated too fast, and why slowing the process down by 12 minutes improved absorption, and how he had figured this out by accident when a heating element in one of his ovens had been malfunctioning. She listened. She ate the cake. It was a small thing. He went back to the kitchen and he didn't make a fuss about it, and Presti looked at him sideways but didn't say anything, and the commissary moved into midday and then into afternoon. She was still there when his shift ended. He came back the next morning and she was there again. Same table, same viewport. The gas giant turned outside unhurried. He brought her broth at the right temperature without waiting to see if she'd ordered it. She looked at the bowl and then at him. "You are doing this again," she said. "Every morning," he said, "until you're not here. You do not know when that will be." "I know. It may be some time." "That's fine," he said. "My shift starts at 0600. She held the bowl. The bioluminescence at her wrists was slightly more regular than yesterday. Not right, not what it should be, but closer. "Why?" she said. It was, he had found, always the question. He had been asked it in various forms many times in his life, by his wife, by his wife's family, by people he had fed through hard times, by strangers who seemed surprised that someone would bother. "Because you need it," he said, "and I can make it." "That is not a sufficient answer." "It's the only one I've got," he said and went back to the kitchen. Her name was Thessaly Voren. She told him on the third day, which he had not expected, the Senari he knew treated name exchange as something weighted, not given lightly to strangers. He told her his name in return, and she repeated it carefully, Yusuf, with the slight tonal adjustment the Senari made when they were committing something to memory rather than just speaking it. He learned over several mornings that she was a researcher. Deep-time archaeology, the study of civilizations so old that even their ruins had become geological, pressed into rock strata over millions of years. She had been traveling between dig sites. She had come to waypoint 11 because her transit connection had been delayed by 3 weeks due to a mechanical failure on the connecting hauler. 3 weeks in a waypoint station, alone, with work she could not do and time she could not fill. He did not ask what Vethara meant. He looked it up instead because he had the feeling it was not a question she would want to answer directly, and because he had found in his life that some things were better understood through research than through conversation. The translation services had 17 different approximate equivalents. He read them all and none of them felt right, and then he found a footnote in a Senari cultural documentation paper written by a human anthropologist that said, "The closest functional translation of Vethara may be the state of grief that has become structural, grief not as an event but as architecture, the way a building is changed forever by a damage it has survived." He sat with that for a while. He made her better grain cakes. On the 5th day, she spoke to him when he brought the broth. My research partner, she said, without preamble, without looking up from the viewport, died 14 months ago. He sat down. She had not invited him to, but she had not invited him to either, and he was learning her particular grammar of silence. I'm sorry, he said. We had been working together for 61 years. She paused. Among the Sanari, a research partnership of that duration there is a word, orithany. It means something like the other half of the same thought. When one half ends, the other must find a new way to think. Have you, he said, found a new way? No, she said simply. This is why I travel. I am moving so that the stillness does not catch me. He understood this. He recognized it from the inside. I moved too, he said. After my wife died, took this posting, came out here where everything is transit and nobody stays long. She looked at him. The silver in her eyes had some depth to it now, not back to normal, he suspected, but no longer quite so flat. How long ago, she said. 4 years, he thought, 4 years and 3 months. And the stillness. He was quiet for a moment. It catches you eventually, he said. That's what I learned. You can move for a long time, but eventually you stop and it catches up, and then you have to let it, you have to sit with it. He looked at his hands on the table. And then you find out it doesn't kill you, even though it feels like it will. The bioluminescence at her wrists pulsed, steady for a moment, then uneven again, but the moment of steady had been real. The Senari do not discuss grief in this way, she said. What way? Directal. Why practically, as if it is a problem with a process rather than she stopped. A weather system, he said. Something that happens to you that you have to learn to navigate. Yes, she looked at him with an expression he was beginning to read, something between curiosity and something that didn't have a translation he'd found yet. How did you know that was what I was going to say? I didn't, he said. I just said what I thought. Among my people, grief is private architecture, the structure inside you. No one speaks of it directly. To do so is considered not rude exactly, but presumptuous. As if you are claiming to understand something that belongs only to the one who carries it. That sounds lonely, he said. She blinked slow, long. Oh yes, she said quietly, it does. He did not know on the sixth day that what he was doing had been noticed. The waypoint had a diplomatic observation role. It was a resupply stop used by enough species that it maintained a small interspecies relations office staffed by 3 people who tracked significant interactions between species and filed reports that went to various governing bodies that Yusuf had never personally engaged with and didn't much think about. One of those 3 people was a Senari cultural liaison named Orith, who had been watching the corner table with increasing attention since day 2, and who filed her first report on day 5 with the subject line, Anomalous Cross-Species Behavioral Event, Waypoint 11 Commissary, flagged for review. Yusuf knew none of this. On the 6th morning, he made something different. He had been thinking about it for 2 days, going through his mental library of dishes, through everything he knew about Senari nutrition and texture preference, and what the anthropological notes said about ceremonial foods and their role in grief practice. He had found a reference to a traditional Senari food called orith cake. Not related to the liaison's name, though the word root was the same, that was historically prepared by a community for someone in Vethara, brought to them without expectation, left at their door. The recipe was not in any database he had access to. What he had was a description of the ingredients and a general principle. Dense, slow-release nutrients combined with a specific aromatic compound derived from a Senari plant he did not have. He had been a cook for 42 years. He found the closest available analog. He ran the preparation 3 times the night before his shift, adjusting each time, tasting between preparations with the understanding that he could not taste what she would taste, but could at least learn what the dish was doing. The third attempt was as close as he could get. He brought it out on a plain plate, no ceremony, set it beside the broth. Oh, she looked at it. Her bioluminescence stopped. Not the broken, irregular pulse stopped, completely, still for almost 8 seconds. Then it came back, and when it did, it was different, not regular, not healed, but warm in a way he had not seen before. Something had shifted in the quality of it. "What is this?" she said. Her voice was careful in a way it had not been before with him. "My version of orith cake," he said. "I couldn't source the original plant. I used what I could find. It's probably not right." She put her fingers on the edge of the plate, did not pick it up. "How do you know about orith cake?" she said. "Research," he said. "You researched Senari grief customs. I research everything I cook for." This is, she stopped. Something was happening in her face that he was watching carefully. "Among my people, orith cake is not sold. It is not served in establishments. It is made by community, by those who have known you long enough to understand the weight of what you carry. It is given without," she stopped again. "No transaction, no expectation, just placed." "I know," he said. "I read that." "You are not my community," she said, but the tone was not an accusation. "No," he said, "I'm just the person who's here." The silver in her eyes did something complex. "Among the Senari," she said slowly, "there is a concept, Vethari Kana. It means, roughly, the stranger who chooses to know you. It is considered, it is rare. It is considered a kind of," she seemed to be struggling with the translation. "It is considered evidence that the universe has not yet finished the sentence it was writing about your life, that there is more to come." Well, he sat down. "Tell me about your research," he said. "Tell me about the civilizations you study." Oh, she looked at him. "You want to hear about extinct civilizations. I want to hear about what matters to you." Another long blink. "I study the Vorath Continuum," she said. "A civilization that existed 11 million years ago in what is now the Senari core systems. They left no written language we have decoded. What they left is structure, the shape of their cities pressed into the the mineral traces of their agriculture, the chemical signatures of their." She paused, and something came alive in her face that had not been there before, a different quality of attention, a specificity. "They built their cities in spirals, always inward spiraling. Every single settlement we have found, regardless of size, spirals inward toward a center. We do not know what was at the center. Whatever it was important enough to build an entire civilization around." "What do you think it was?" he said. "I think," she stopped, started again. Kale thought it was a form of memorial practice, that the spiral was a path toward the memory of something important. He believed civilizations organize themselves around the thing they are most afraid to lose. She looked at the viewport. "He spent 40 years on that theory. I spent 40 years arguing with him about it." Who was winning?" "Neither of us. That was why we kept going." He listened. She talked. The broth cooled, and he heated it again, and she ate the grain cake in slow, deliberate bites. And she talked about the Vorath Continuum and about Kale, and about the specific excavation site on a rock planet in the Senari core that had been their shared project for 19 years. The site that she now could not bring herself to return to alone. He asked questions when he had them. Real questions, not conversation maintenance questions, the kind that came from actually following what she was saying. She noticed, he could see her notice. The quality of her attention shifted toward him in a way that felt like a door opening very slightly, just enough to let some light through. When his shift ended, he said, "Same time tomorrow." She said, "I know your schedule." He went home and he sat in his small quarters and he thought about spirals, about civilizations built around what they were afraid to lose, about what it meant to organize yourself around an absence. He thought about his wife's kitchen in Marseille and how he had not been able to go back to it. He thought about the fact that he had just told a Senari stranger about his wife for the first time since he had taken this posting. He had not planned to do that. It had arrived in the conversation naturally without announcement, and he had let it. Well, he was not sure what that meant. On the ninth day, there was a problem. Orith, the Senari cultural liaison, came to the commissary before the morning rush and asked to speak with Yusuf. He could tell from her posture, the Senari signaled formality in the angle of the upper body, a specific vertical precision that this was official. She was professional. She was not unkind. She explained that she had been observing the situation with Thessaly Voren and filing reports, and that she had received a response from the Senari diplomatic office that morning. Thessaly Voren, Orith said, is not a general researcher. She is a senior fellow of the Vorath Institute, which is under the direct cultural patronage of the Senari Continuance Council. Her Vethara is a matter of some institutional concern. The council has expressed discomfort at reports that she has been spending significant time in personal engagement with a human cook. I bring her breakfast, Yusuf said. Over 9 days. She was not eating. That is not, Orith stopped, recalibrated. The council's concern is that a Senari of her standing in a state of Vethara may be forming a dependency on cross-species emotional support that is inappropriate to her status and to Senari grief custom, which prioritizes internal processing, Yusuf said, private architecture I know. Orith looked at him with a slight adjustment to her expression that, after 3 years of working with Senari, he recognized as surprise. Yes, she said, they have asked me to recommend that the morning arrangement cease. He was quiet for a moment. Has she asked for it to cease? He said. That is not how. Has she asked? Orith was silent. I'm going to ask you something, Yusuf said, and he kept his voice level and his tone respectful because he meant no disrespect. And I'd like an honest answer, not the official answer, your answer. She looked at him. Is she better than she was 9 days ago? A long pause. Yes, Orith said quietly, she is. Then I'm going to keep bringing her breakfast, he said. And if she asks me to stop, I will stop. But I'm not going to stop because a council on another planet is uncomfortable. Orith studied him for a moment. Then she said, in a different voice, less formal, more personal, the voice of someone setting down a piece of professional equipment, the Vethari Kana is considered archaic. The concept. Most of my generation considers it sentimental, a pre-modern way of understanding connection. What do you think? He said. She seemed to consider whether to answer. I think, she said carefully, that the data I have been sending to the council is complete. I think I have been filing accurate reports of what has occurred without filing accurate reports of what it has meant. She straightened slightly. The formality returned, but different, not as a wall now, more like a frame. I will tell them I spoke with you. I will tell them I found no evidence of inappropriate dependency. I will tell them that researcher Voren appears to be engaging with her process. Thank you, he said. She left, he went back to the kitchen, he made breakfast. He told Thessaly about the conversation that morning. He did not hide it. He had found in his life that the things you didn't say had a way of becoming the shape of everything. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. The council, she said, has been managing my Vethara from a distance for 14 months. They send resources, they send protocol, they send appropriate intervals of contact. She looked at her hands. The bioluminescence there was close to regular now, not quite, but close. They have not once sent someone to simply sit with me. I know, he said. You knew this when you sat down on the first day. I suspected it, he said. I didn't know you yet. She looked at him, and then she said something that surprised him, not in what it was, but in how she said it, which was in Senari. a soft, low phrase, 3 syllables. What does that mean? He said. It is a very old word, she thought. It translates approximately as the warmth that has no obligation. The Senari use it for sunlight, for things that give without requiring. Well, he sat with that. I have requirements, he said honestly. I need to feed people, I'm not sure I know how to stop. That, she said, is not what I meant by requirement. On the 12th day, she came to the kitchen. She came around the back of the counter, into the space that was his, that smelled of the specific Senari mineral compounds he'd been working with and something human underneath it, coffee and iron, and she stood in the kitchen and watched him work. He didn't stop what he was doing. He talked her through it. The specific temperature curve for Senari grain cake. The way you could feel in the texture when the mineral interaction was happening right. The 37 different dietary profiles he held in his head simultaneously every morning shift. This is remarkable, she said. Well, it's just cooking. No, she said. You have built a practice around the specific needs of strangers. You have made their biology your specialty. You hold 14 species nutritional requirements in your memory and adapt them continuously. This is, she paused, this is archaeology. You are studying what people need in order to build something for them. He had never thought of it that way. He thought about it for the rest of the morning. On the 14th day, her transit connection was repaired. She could leave the next morning. She came to the commissary at 0600 as she always did. He had made something different that morning, not Senari specific, something else, something he had been thinking about for 3 days. A traditional Yoruba dish his mother had made, translated into ingredients available on the station, adjusted and readjusted until the flavor profile was close to what he remembered. He brought it to the table and set it beside the broth. Oh, she looked at it. This is yours, she said, human. Mine specifically, he said. My mother's recipe, I haven't made it in a long time. Why now? Well, he sat down. Because I'm going to miss you when you leave, he said. And I wanted to share something that was mine while I still could. She was still for a moment. The bioluminescence at her wrists moved in a rhythm he had not seen before, slow and steady, with a specific quality to it that he didn't have a reference for. What does that rhythm mean? He said. That one's what you're doing now. Oh, she looked down at her wrists. It is, she stopped, started again. It has no standard translation. It is not a communication signal. It is purely involuntary. It occurs when another stop. Among the Senari, we have a concept, servith, the moment when something outside you enters the architecture of your grief and changes the structure of it, not removes it, not heals it, changes it, makes new rooms. Oh, he understood. Is that what's happening? He said. Yes, she said quietly, I believe it is. She ate the dish. Slowly, carefully, with full attention, the way she had learned to eat over 14 days of practice. When she finished, she set down the utensil and she sat for a moment in the particular quality of stillness that he now recognized as her thinking. I am going back to the excavation site, she said. Kale's site, our site. She looked at the viewport. I have not been back in 14 months, but I think, she stopped. I think the spiral goes inward toward what you are afraid to lose. I think Kale was right, and I think the only W. To honor that understanding is to go back to where the work is. He'd be glad, Yusuf said. Yes, she looked at him. How do you know? Because you talked about him for 14 days, and I never once got the impression he'd want you to stay away from what mattered to both of you. The silver eyes held him for a long moment. No, she said, he would not. She left the next morning on the 0700 hauler. He was in the middle of the morning rush when she left. He knew the departure time but couldn't leave the kitchen, and she knew his schedule, and neither of them had made a point of a formal goodbye because it hadn't felt like what was needed. At 0800, when the rush had thinned, Presti came to him with a look on her face he had not seen from her before. She left something, Presti said, the Sanari researcher. She left it at the corner table before she went. He walked out to the corner tables. There was a small object on the surface. Dark stone Sanari work he could tell from the texture, the specific mineral compound carved into a shape that took him a moment to recognize. A spiral. As inward. He picked it up, it fit in his palm. On the flat base in careful Sanari script was an inscription he could not read, and underneath it, in galactic standard, in handwriting that was precise and slightly formal. For the Vethari Kana who fed me back to the work. The word for what you are does not exist in galactic standard. I have written a paper proposing one. If it is accepted, I will send you a copy. Ati Voren. He stood there for a while holding the spiral in both hands. The commissary moved around him, the Grath engineer came in for his usual enormous plate. The Velun researcher arrived with their temperature sensor. Presti called something from the kitchen about the grain-cake ratios, and he called back that he was coming. He put the spiral in his pocket. He went back to the kitchen. He made breakfast. The paper was accepted 8 months later. He received a copy, forwarded through the Waypoint's diplomatic office with a note from Orith that said, in typically precise Sanari fashion, that she had reviewed the paper and found its central argument compelling, and that she had revised her understanding of several things. The paper was titled, Vethari Kana Revisited, on the adaptive function of cross-species grief witnesses in long-duration Vethara states. The proposed new term, the one Thessaly Voren was recommending be added to the Galactic Standard Lexicon, was described in the abstract as a figure who arrives at the intersection of your grief and your hunger and feeds you without waiting to be asked, and in doing so changes the architecture of your loss from uninhabitable to structural. The galactic standard word she proposed was built from the Sanari, the Yoruba, and the pre-modern linguistic root shared between them that neither people had known they had in common until a linguist checked her footnotes. The word was Yusuf. He read the paper 3 times in his quarters on a night when the gas giant outside was doing something spectacular with its clouds that he kept meaning to watch and kept getting distracted from. The 3rd time he read it, he sat for a very long time and did not do anything at all. Then he went to the kitchen and made himself a cup of coffee and stood at the viewport and watched the gas giant turn, amber and gold and vast, in the space outside. In his pocket, the spiral sat warm against his hand. He had not taken it out in 8 months. He had carried it into every morning shift. He had carried it through 300 and something mornings of the same work. The broth, the grain cakes, the adjustments and recalibrations, the Grath engineer and the Velun researcher, and the endless rotation of strangers who came through needing something that he could provide. He took it out now and set it on the counter beside the coffee. The spiral went inward, toward what mattered, toward what you were afraid to lose. He thought about his wife's kitchen. He thought about how he had told a Sanari archaeologist about her, in passing, without ceremony, and how that had felt like something loosening. Not healing, just loosening, making new rooms. He thought about the word in a paper that now existed in 17 academic databases across 6 species, and had his name in it. He thought she took something away with her and left something in its place. That is a fair trade. He turned off the light. He left the coffee half finished. He left the spiral on the counter where the morning light would catch it. He went to sleep. In the morning, there was work to do. Thank you for being here for this one. I mean that more than usual. Some stories are about the battles and some stories are about the long quiet between them, and I find the quiet ones stay with me longer. If you felt something in that ending that you couldn't quite name, that's the point. That's what we're here for, if. You want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people doing the most extraordinary thing, which is simply staying present for each other. Subscribe and leave a comment below telling me which moment landed for you. Every single comment gets read. Everyone, take care of yourselves. And if someone in your life is sitting at a corner table not eating, maybe go heat up the broth.